So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about the Eightfold Path and a little bit more about cessation. So today's sutta is Majjhima Nikaya 44. That is the Chula Vedala Sutta, the shorter series of questions and answers. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was staying at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel's sanctuary. Then the lay follower Visakha went to the bhikkhuni Dhammadina, and after paying homage to her, he sat down at one side and asked her. So just a brief background on these two particular people, because they have a history. The understanding is that before Dhammadina became a bhikkhuni, she was actually a householder with Visakha. Visakha and Dhammadina, they were both husband and wife before she became a bhikkhuni. And what happened is the Buddha was giving a discourse, and Visakha had gone to see the Buddha. And while he was listening to the discourse, he experienced the attainment of becoming an anagami. So he came back home the next morning, and she was there, and she wondered what happened. And he had this very serene look on his face, very tranquil, very silent, very quiet, didn't say much, and didn't really pay attention to her. And she was wondering what had happened. And when it was nighttime, before they went to bed, he decided to sleep on the floor. And she asked him what happened. And he said, I no longer have any interest in seeing you as my wife. And so I can't sleep beside you in the bed because I've had this attainment. And she was so curious about this. He asked Visakha all about it. And Visakha talked about the Buddha, talked about the Dhamma, talked about his experiences. And she then decided, I'm going to become a bhikkhuni. I am going to go and ordain as a bhikkhuni under the Buddha's dispensation. And Visakha was so delighted by that. And he said that would be wonderful. So she went ahead and became a bhikkhuni. And not long after, she became an arahant. And Visakha continued to be a layperson and continued to be an anagami. So what follows now is their discussion with Dhammadina, the arahant, now having a discourse for Visakha, or a dialogue rather, with Visakha, her former husband. And it's a very interesting discussion, very interesting dialogue. So just pay close attention to what's being said here. So Visakha says, and he asks her, Lady, identity is said. What is called identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, these 5 aggregates affected by clinging are called identity by the Blessed One. That is the material form aggregate affected by clinging and craving. The feeling aggregate affected by craving and clinging. The perception aggregate affected by craving and clinging. The formations aggregate affected by craving and clinging. And the consciousness aggregate affected by craving and clinging. These 5 aggregates affected by craving and clinging are called identity by the Blessed One. So the 5 aggregates are basically psychophysiological components of what make up what is considered the personality or identity in this case. When we talk about mentality, materiality, we understand mentality, materiality to be materiality, which is material form, and mentality, which is made up of contact, feeling, perception, intention, and attention. Contact gives rise to feeling, and so that is the feeling aggregate. That is to say, what is experienced. It is the process through which an experience is understood. Perception, which is the recognizing of what it is that one is seeing or experiencing. Perception is that which labels, that which recognizes what is being experienced. And then formations, so intention and formations are closely connected. As I said before, to know the quality of your formations, see what the quality of your intention is. If your intentions, your choices incline towards the wholesome, then the formations are rooted in the wholesome. If your intentions are rooted in the unwholesome, then the formations are rooted in the unwholesome. So when the formations arise, they give rise to a certain kind of intention. And if one acts upon that kind of intention or changes it, that particular activity has an effect on the next arising of formations. So intention and formations are clearly connected. And then consciousness flows through attention. Where you put your attention to, where you attend to, that's where consciousness flows. So when you have the contact between the eye and form and you pay attention to what is being seen, there is the arising of eye consciousness, which directs attention, or attention is directed to whatever is being seen. Likewise with the other six sense bases. So there is this connection between attention and consciousness. So when you are in the meditation and your attention is rooted in the loving kindness, for example, that consciousness is directed, the awareness is directed towards the loving kindness. So practicing mindfulness is basically understanding where attention is moving and hence how consciousness is arising, affected or dependent by the object, dependent upon what is arising. So if you have hindrances arising, then there's attention given to those hindrances. And when that hindrance is being attended to, there is another consciousness that flows dependent upon hindrances. So there's awareness of those hindrances as mental objects. The mind consciousness arises dependent upon those hindrances. But the personality or identity is understood to be made up of these components of nama rupa, or mentality materiality, or also understood to be as the five aggregates. Saying, "Good lady," the lay follower Visakha delighted and rejoiced in the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina's words. Then he asked her a further question. "Lady, origin of identity, he said. What is called the origin of identity by the Blessed One?" So what Visakha is doing is he's asking Dhammadina in the context of the Four Noble Truths. So we're understanding what is identity, which is seen as equivalent to dukkha. Because when the aggregates are affected by clinging, by craving and clinging, there is bound to be dukkha. And the origin of that, she says, is, friend Visakha, it is craving, which brings renewal of being, which brings up habitual tendencies, and is accompanied by delight and lust, and delights in this and that, and has clinging to it. That is craving for sensual pleasures. You say, I like this or I don't like this in the way of the experience of the six sense bases. Craving for being. You want to be in a specific jhana. You want to find out what kind of jhana you are in. This is called craving of being. Craving for being. Craving for non-being. You don't want to be in the current state you're in. And so this is craving for non-being. This is called the origin of identity by the Blessed One. Lady, cessation of identity, the third noble truth. Cessation of identity is said. What is called the cessation of identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, it is the remainderless fading away and ceasing, the giving up, relinquishing, letting go, and rejecting of that same craving. This is called the cessation of identity by the Blessed One. That is to say, using the 6 R's, using right effort to let go, to relinquish, you give up, you reject that same craving. When you relax, you experience an expansion in your mind, a spaciousness in your mind that is the mind experiencing supramundane nirvana. Lady, the way leading to the cessation of identity, the fourth noble truth, the way leading to the cessation of identity said, what is called the way leading to the cessation of identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, it is just this noble eightfold path. That is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness. We'll get into each of these folds of the Eightfold Path in a little bit. Lady, is that clinging the same as these 5 aggregates affected by clinging, or is the clinging something apart from the 5 aggregates affected by clinging? Friend Visakha, that clinging is neither the same as these 5 aggregates affected by clinging, nor is clinging something apart from the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. It is the desire and lust in regard to the 5 aggregates affected by clinging that is the clinging there. In other words, if we were to say that clinging was separate from the 5 aggregates, then clinging would be considered to be a 6th aggregate. But if we were to say that clinging and the 5 aggregates are one and the same, then there is no escape from clinging and craving if they are inherent in the 5 aggregates. Rather, when you identify with the body, when you identify with the 6 sense bases, when you identify with feeling, when you take personal the experience that's happening, when you take personal the perception that arises, when you take personal the intentions and choices that are there in every moment, when you take personal the awareness that arises dependent upon the experience, then there is the clinging that is there in the aggregates. Then that clinging has to be relinquished by seeing with wisdom that there is taking something personal. There is identifying with an experience. There is an I like it or I don't like it push and pull movement going on, which is craving or aversion. Lady, how does identity view come to be? Identity view is that which takes something personal. And here she says, here, friend Visakha, an untaught, ordinary person who has no regard for noble ones and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, who has no regard for true men and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, regards material form as self. That means they take this body as myself, or self as possessed of material form, or that the material form belongs to an independent self, or material form as in self, or that the self is outside of material form and so it is contained within the self, or self as in material form, that there is a self within this body. These are the 5 views which multiply, or the 4 views rather, which when multiplied by the 5 aggregates are the 20 wrong self views that are let go of when one attains stream entry. And so one may regard feeling as self, or self as possessed of feeling, or feeling as in self, or self as in feeling. They can regard perception as self, or self as possessed of perception, or perception as in self, or self as in perception. They regard formations as self, or self as possessed of formations, or formations as in self, or self as in formations. They regard consciousness as self, or self as possessed of consciousness, or consciousness as in self, or self as in consciousness. That is how identity view comes to be. Lady, how does identity view not come to be? Your friend Visakha, a well-taught noble disciple who has regard for noble ones and is skilled and disciplined in their Dhamma, who has regard for true men and is skilled and disciplined in their Dhamma, does not regard material form as self. Why? Because they see form as being impermanent. This body continues to age in every moment. The cells pass away. The hairs turn thinner. The hairs gray. The skin wrinkles. The faculties, the physical sense faculties, diminish with age. And so if it is impermanent, and if we consider self to be something that is permanent and unchanging, it cannot be considered as material form, or self as possessed of material form. That would mean that there is an independent self, but that self would have to be experienced, and it is not experienced unless it's experienced through the body itself. But in that case, that self would be dependent upon the body. And if that's the case, then that self cannot be considered to be that unchanging self. Or material form as in self. Same way, if there is material form as in self, then that self is, again, independent of material form. And that material form is experienced, but not the self. And so if you can't experience the self, you can't say that there is some kind of unchanging self, or self as in material form. That means the self is dependent upon material form. So in that case, that would mean that when this body decays, so does the self. But if that's the case, then that can't be considered to be a permanent, unchanging self. He does not regard feeling as self, or self as in feeling, or self possessed of feeling, or feeling as in self, or self as in feeling. Feeling means experience, Vedana, that is any of the experience of the six sense bases, sensations, thoughts, ideas, notions. They're always changing. You have no control over what you're experiencing. You can only close your ears, and then so that the sound doesn't penetrate the ears, but you can still hear it still. In other words, you cannot control what you hear. You cannot control what you see. You cannot control what you smell. You can't control what you taste. It will be whatever arises. And so to have self in regards to in any way as feeling would not make sense, because feeling is always changing, always impermanent, always arising and passing away. And painful feeling can turn pleasant, and pleasant feeling can turn painful. And so that means that if a self arises in any of those, it cannot be, because a self is understood to be filled with bliss, filled with happiness. But here, self can be possessed of dukkha. Therefore, feeling can be possessed of dukkha. Therefore, feeling cannot be considered as self. He does not regard perception as self, or self as possessed of perception, or perception as in self, or self as in perception. Now, perception arises in conjunction with feeling. When you hear my voice, you recognize it as my voice. When you see me on the screen, you recognize me as being on the screen. That's because there is recognition tied to that experience, and that is perception. But I go away, and so does the feeling, and so does the perception tied to that feeling. If that's the case, then perception is impermanent and liable to change, and therefore considered to be unsatisfactory. And if that's the case, it cannot be considered to be self. He does not regard formations as self, or self as possessed of formations, or formations as in self, or self as in formations. Formations keep arising and passing away. Contact gives rise to an experience that gives rise to an intention to react in a certain way. That reaction, or the intention to react, is dependent upon one of three formations: mental formations, which give rise to the experience of the feeling and perception; verbal formations, which give rise to expression of speech or thinking. Another way to understand verbal formations is when you're reading a book silently, you can actually hear the thoughts in terms of the words that you're reading. Those are the verbal formations coming into being and giving rise to the experience of verbalizing, depending upon what you're reading in your mind. And then physical formations to move, that is dependent upon contact and feeling. So when you take away that contact, then those formations no longer arise. And so that means those formations, being dependent, not independent, and therefore impermanent, and therefore liable to cause unsatisfactoriness, and should not be considered as self. He does not regard consciousness or awareness as self, or self as possessed of consciousness, or consciousness as in self, or self as in consciousness. Consciousness arises, remember, dependent upon contact between the eye and form, ear and sound, nose and odors, tongue and flavors, body and tangibles, mind and mind objects. And so when the sense base and the sense object join or make contact, there is the arising of that particular sensory awareness. Take away the contact and that awareness dissipates, ceases. Therefore, consciousness also, being impermanent, cannot produce everlasting happiness, and so is liable to bring about dukkha or unsatisfactoriness. Therefore, consciousness in any form cannot be considered as self. That is how identity view does not come to be. Lady, what is the Noble Eightfold Path? Friend Visakha, it is just this Noble Eightfold Path. That is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness. Lady, is the Noble Eightfold Path conditioned or unconditioned? Friend Visakha, the Noble Eightfold Path is conditioned. So in other words, whenever you are in jhana, or whenever you are applying any of the aspects of the Eightfold Path, if you get attached to it, you are getting attached to something that is conditioned. In other words, if you become caught up in what jhana you are in, you're getting caught up in something that is conditioned. But if you let go of it and see this as a raft, as a boat to cross from one side to the other, this one side being craving and suffering, and this other side being the cessation of suffering and the unconditioned. And so you use the raft, which are the conditions of the Eightfold Path. So you use the jhana practice, sila, samadhi, and panya to go towards the unconditioned. But once you experience the unconditioned, then you let go of the raft. So don't get attached to whatever jhana experience you're having. Don't get caught up in where you are at or whether you're in this jhana or that. Just see it for what it is and let go of any expectations. Lady, are the three aggregates included by the Noble Eightfold Path, or is the Noble Eightfold Path included by the three aggregates? The three aggregates are not in reference to the five aggregates. When we talk about these aggregates, we're talking about collections, or we're talking about categorizations. So the three categories here are sila, samadhi, and panya, or ethics and morality, meditation, and insight and wisdom. The three aggregates are not included by the Noble Eightfold Path, friend Visakha, but the Noble Eightfold Path is included by the three aggregates: right speech, right action, and right livelihood. These states are included in the aggregate of sila, or virtue. So what is right speech? Right speech is abstaining from false speech, abstaining from harsh speech, abstaining from slanderous speech, abstaining from gossip, abstaining from abusive speech, abstaining from idle chatter, abstaining from creating divisions between people, and so on. So one way to think about how to use right speech is to use this acronym, which is THINK, T-H-I-N-K. Before you speak, think. T, is it timely? Is it the right time to say what you're going to say, depending upon the context and situation? H, honesty. Is it truthful? Is it honest? Is it factual? Do you know it do you know what you're about to say to be for a fact? I, what is the intention behind what you're about to say? Is the intention wholesome or unwholesome? N, necessary. Is it necessary for the benefit of all parties involved for you to say what you're going to say? And K, kindness. Can it be said with loving kindness? Can it be said in a way that is peaceful and friendly and seeks to not create divisions, but seeks to bring peace and resolve conflict? Right action. What is right action? Right action is abstaining from killing and harming living beings intentionally, abstaining from taking what is not given, abstaining from sensual and sexual misconduct. And within that also is abstaining from taking intoxicants, but that's implied in mindfulness, where you don't indulge in alcohol, you don't indulge in other intoxicants, you don't get caught up in intoxicants because you are mindful. So what we're talking about when it comes to right speech and right action is really following the 5 precepts. Every time you take the 5 precepts and you make a commitment, it's not a ritual, it's not a ceremony, it's not something you just do as a rites and ritual. It's something that you make a commitment to every morning in the beginning of your day. You say that I will follow the 5 precepts and therefore I will follow right speech and right action. Right livelihood. What is right livelihood? Right livelihood means abstaining from any kind of business or work that deals in weapons, poisons, alcohol, people, and meat. And what that means is you don't deal in business, or you're not an employee of a business that deals in trading weapons, that deals in trading poisons, that deals in trading weapons, that deals in prostitution and human trafficking, and that deals in killing animals for meat. Right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness. These states are included in the aggregate of samadhi, or collectedness, or meditation. So what is right effort? Right effort is 4-fold. It is making the effort to make sure that you prevent any unarisen, unwholesome states from arising. You make an effort to let go of any arisen unwholesome states. You make an effort to generate a wholesome state of mind. And you make an effort to maintain a wholesome state of mind. And so when you use the 6 R's, you are using right effort. You are cultivating right effort. When you recognize that there is a hindrance, an unwholesome state of mind, you prevent that from further flowing. And so the unarisen wholesome qualities of mind stop in their tracks, and you recognize. When you release your attention away from them and relax and tranquilize the mind and body, you abandon those unwholesome states of mind by abandoning the craving, the tightness and tension, and therefore the formations rooted in those hindrances. When you come back to your smile, you generate a wholesome state of mind. And then when you return to your object of meditation, you maintain that wholesome state of mind. And you repeat whenever necessary. Right mindfulness. Right mindfulness is observing how mind's attention moves from one place to the next. And so whenever you are using right effort, whenever you're recognizing your attention is no longer here using right effort, you're also applying right mindfulness. Mindfulness in regards to the body as body, feeling as feeling, mind as mind, and mind objects as mind objects, or phenomena as phenomena. And what that simply means is you're aware of what's happening in relation to the body. You're aware of what's happening in terms of, is there craving arising in relation to the body? Is there identification arising in relation to the body? Is there identification arising in relation to feeling? Is there identification arising in relation to mind and mindsets? Is there identification arising in reference to the phenomena that's happening? That could be the hindrances, that could be the enlightenment factors, that could be the 4 noble truths, that could be any kind of phenomena that arises. And if there is identification, then you use right effort to let go of it. So you're not using the 6 R's just in meditation practice. You're using it in daily living. You're becoming aware of your mind and the states of mind dependent upon body, mind, feeling, and phenomena. And you're seeing if there's craving arising or aversion or identification arising in reference to those. When you see that, you let go of it using right effort. And so mindfulness allows you to be aware of every present moment and seeing everything that's arising in every present moment as being impermanent, as being liable to create dukkha, and therefore not to be considered as self, not to be taken as being personal, seeing everything as being impersonal. And this is using yoniso manasikara, or what I call attention rooted in reality. And right collectedness. What is right collectedness? When the mind becomes collected around its object of meditation, secluded from unwholesome states, secluded from hindrances, secluded from sensual experiences, paying attention only to its object, it gives rise to the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana, and then the arupa states within the fourth jhana: infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. Right view and right intention. These states are included in the aggregate of panya, or insight and wisdom. So what is right view? There are two understandings of right view. There is the mundane understanding and the supramundane understanding. The mundane understanding gives rise to certain qualities of the mind, creates empathetic qualities in the mind, creates generous qualities in the mind, creates qualities of appreciation in the mind. And the reason being is that supramundane right view inclines the mind towards seeing that there is a cause and effect to every action, to every intention in the form of thoughts, in the form of speech, and in the form of physical actions. That there is a rebirth happening in every moment. Now, you don't have to believe in rebirth on the macro level, but at least you see that there's an arising and passing away of different states of mind in every moment. That there is an appreciation for one's parents, even if one's parents has abandoned one, even if one's parents have been abusive. Obviously, it doesn't justify the abuse, but one has an appreciation for the fact that one's parents brought one to this life, a life which has the potential to bring one to the experience of nibbana. And so there's gratitude for them, gratitude for one's elders, for one's relatives. There's the understanding that there is this world and the other. And what that means is that there is a openness of understanding that there can be potential life forms in other dimensions. That could mean the 31 planes of existence, or that could mean this world and another world. This gives clarity to mind to say that we are not alone, and that there is a sense of compassion to be given, not only to us as humans, but to all beings, whether they are human or non-human. Then there is the understanding that there are those who have attained the path. There are those who have completed the path. And there is gratitude to them, and there is a recognition that they can provide some pointing out to how to walk that path. The supermundane right view arises when you have the experience of arahatship, and that experience is the full understanding of the Four Noble Truths in every single way. And what that means is you completely understand what dukkha is, what suffering is. You abandon the causes of suffering, namely ignorance, conceit, and craving. You experience and realize for yourself nibbana, the cessation of suffering. And you have cultivated and perfect the Eightfold Path to lead you to arahatship and to experience the Four Noble Truths. After that, then your perspective is always in the context of the Four Noble Truths. You can understand the Four Noble Truths through dependent origination. For example, when craving arises, you understand that craving is the dukkha. You understand that the cause of the craving is identifying with the feeling. You understand by letting go, cultivating right effort, which is the heart of the Eightfold Path, and therefore the 6 R's, which are the heart of the Eightfold Path. leads to the cessation of craving by ceasing the identifying with the feeling. And the reason why the 6 R's are considered to be the Eightfold Path is because it is right effort. And the right effort is the heart of the Eightfold Path, because you use right effort from going from wrong view to right view, wrong intention to right intention, wrong speech to right speech, wrong action to right action, wrong livelihood to right livelihood, wrong mindfulness to right mindfulness, wrong collectedness to right collectedness, wrong insight to right insight, and wrong liberation to right liberation. The last two, right insight and right liberation, have to do with the fruition of arahatship. That is where the solidification of the Eightfold Path happens, where now the operating system of the mind is automatically following the Eightfold Path without a second thought. It becomes the behavioral pattern of an arahat's mind. And so the Four Noble Truths are fully established. And there's liberation, because now the mind understands that there is no more coming to be. There is no more being. There is no more future birth or future death. And right intention. What is right intention? Right intention is threefold. It is renunciation, non-ill will, and non-cruelty. Renunciation means seeing things as being not me, mine, or myself. So whenever you see a feeling as being impermanent, as being liable to cause dukkha, whether it's painful or pleasant because it changes, and seeing it as being impersonal, you are using the renunciation aspect of right intention. When you cultivate loving kindness and your words are imbued with loving kindness, when your words are imbued with compassion, when your actions are imbued with loving kindness and action, then you are cultivating the factors of non-ill will and non-cruelty of right intention. Lady, what is collectedness? What is the basis of collectedness? What is the equipment of collectedness? What is the development of collectedness? Unification of mind, friend Visakha, is collectedness. In other words, unification of mind, which means chitta ekagata, doesn't mean one-pointed. It means that the mind collects itself around an object. Its attention is no longer dispersed. Its attention is no longer scattered. It is unified with one object. It's flowing towards one object of meditation. This is collectedness. This is jhana. The 4 foundations of mindfulness are the basis of collectedness. Why? Because you are paying attention to whenever there is some kind of craving for the body, or some kind of craving in reference to the body, or in reference to the mind, in reference to feelings, or in reference to objects or phenomena. And when you do that, you're observing how mind's attention moves from its object to something else, which is a distraction. And so this is the basis for having collectedness, because then you use right effort, which is the equipment of collectedness. The 4 right kinds of striving or effort are the equipment of collectedness. That is to say, when you use the 6 R's, you are equipping collectedness. You are maintaining collectedness. You're bringing back mind towards being collected. The repetition, development, and cultivation of these same states, as mentioned, is the development of collectedness therein. Now we get into something very interesting. Listen very carefully. Lady, how many formations are there? There are these 3 formations, friend Visakha: the bodily formation, the verbal formation, and the mental formation. But lady, what is the bodily formation? What is the verbal formation? What is the mental formation? In-breathing and out-breathing, friend Visakha, are bodily formation. Also, any reference to the body in terms of contact with the body, in reference to movement, is also bodily formation. Applied thought and sustained thought are the verbal formation. In other words, having an intention and verbalizing it or visualizing it is part of verbal formations. Thinking about what you're about to say before you speak is also verbal formations, that is applied and sustained thought. Perception and feeling are mental formation. But lady, why are in-breathing and out-breathing the bodily formation? Why are applied thought and sustained thought the verbal formation? Why are perception and feeling the mental formation? And Visakha, in-breathing and out-breathing are bodily. These states are bound up with the body. That is why in-breathing and out-breathing are the bodily formation. First, one applies thought, thinks about something, and examines it or sustains thought, and subsequently breaks out into speech. That is why applied thought and sustained thought are the verbal formation. Perception and feeling are mental. Even when you have a bodily feeling, it is experienced by the mind. It is experienced by mentality. When you perceive something, even if it's in the physical sense of the word, in terms of seeing something physical or feeling something physical and recognizing that this experience is itchy or hot or cold or windy or wet or dry, these perceptions are still mental because they come into contact with the mind. These states are bound up with the mind. That is why perception and feeling are the mental formation. Now, how does the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling come to be? When he says the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, he's not talking about how does one intentionally get there. That is the practice of the anagami and the arhat. What he's talking about is how does an attainment happen? How does a attainment into stream entry or sakadagami happen? How does an attainment of anagami or arhatship happen in terms of the cessation of perception and feeling, which is followed by the experience of the unconditioned? How does it happen? And so she says, friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, it does not occur to them, I shall attain the cessation of perception and feeling, or I am attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, or I have attained the cessation of perception and feeling. But rather, their mind was previously developed in such a way that it leads them to that state. In other words, you cannot will to be in nibbana. You cannot will to have an attainment. It arises because of the right causes and conditions. It arises because of continually letting go of even the desire for cessation. See, she's not talking about that he will attain, that he says, I will attain it. Instead, he lets go of that idea. And obviously, while you're in cessation, you don't have the concept that I am attaining the cessation of perception. And when you come out of it, you don't say that I have attained it. You just experience the links of dependent origination. And then there is a moment where you experience profound relief and joy and say, what was that? Lady, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, which states first cease in him? The bodily formation, the verbal formation, or the mental formation? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, first the verbal formation ceases, then the bodily formation, then the mental formation. Why? Think about it. When you sit down for meditation and you get into the first jhana, first you intentionalize the experience of metta, then you let go of the thinking, and now your observation rests on the metta. Therefore, there is no longer any verbalizing going, and so verbal formations cease. When you get to the fourth jhana, you start to lose contact with the body, and you start to lose, or your breathing starts to become less apparent. And so there is the ceasing of the bodily formation. And finally, when you attain the cessation of perception and feeling, you no longer have any inputs that are happening with regards to any kind of experience of feeling or perception. Lady, how does emergence from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling come to be? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu is emerging from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, it does not occur to him, I shall emerge from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling. In other words, when you are in cessation, you are in cessation. There's no understanding that I am going to come out of cessation. It will happen when it happens. It might last for a couple of moments or a few more seconds than that. You have no control over that in that moment in terms of the attainment. Or I am emerging from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling. When you come out of it, your mind is in an unconditioned state. So it doesn't even have a thought. It makes contact with the Nibbana element. Or I have emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling. Your mind doesn't look at it from that sense. It just looks at it and experiences profound relief, joy. But rather, his mind has previously been developed in such a way that it leads him to that state. What does that mean, previously been developed? That means using the 6 R's, using right effort, being in jhana, having no expectation, no anticipation of what signposts arise or don't arise, and continually letting go, even the desire for nibbana. Lady, when a bhikkhu is emerging from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, which states arise first in him? The bodily formation, the verbal formation, or the mental formation? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu is emerging from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, first the mental formations arise. There is a feeling and perception dependent upon the contact with the Nibbana element. And so you experience relief and joy because of that. Then the bodily formation. Now you come into contact with body. And then the verbal formation, which is to say, when it comes to the bodily formation, you experience great amounts of energy in the body, great amounts of energy in the mind. And then the verbal formation, that usually happens when you say, what was that? What just happened? Lady, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, how many kinds of contact touch him? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, 3 kinds of contact touch him. Voidness contact, signless contact, desireless contact, also known as emptiness contact, signless contact, and undirected contact. This is contact with the Nibbana element, the unconditioned, because it is empty of any kind of self, because it is not a sign, it is not an object, because there is no craving in it, there is no direction given to how that experience is to happen. And so that contact, which is empty of self, is void. That contact which has no object is the signless contact. And that contact which is undirected is the desireless contact. The emptiness contact, because it arises from the insight into anatta. The signless contact, because it arises from the understanding of impermanence. And the desireless contact, because it arises from the understanding of dukkha. Lady, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, to what does his mind incline? To what does it lean? To what does it tend? Friend Visakha, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, his mind inclines to seclusion, leans to seclusion, tends to seclusion. When we talk about seclusion, we're talking about a mind that is completely empty of anything. Seclusion comes from the word viveka, and that can mean a mind that is tending towards the experience of that relief, secluded from everything, including all mental states. But viveka also means a specific type of understanding. That understanding is seeing the links of dependent origination. Viveka really means understanding what is real and what is unreal. And so that understanding comes from having seen the links of dependent origination. Lady, how many kinds of feeling are there? And Visakha, there are three kinds of feeling: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither painful nor pleasant feeling. But lady, what is pleasant feeling? What is painful feeling? What is neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, whatever is felt bodily or mentally as pleasant and soothing is pleasant feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as painful or hurting is painful feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as neither soothing nor hurting is neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Lady, what is pleasant and what is painful in regard to pleasant feeling? What is painful and what is pleasant in regard to painful feeling? What is pleasant and what is painful in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, pleasant feeling is pleasant when it persists and painful when it changes. You're enjoying a nice warm shower, suddenly it stops and there's cold water. So the pleasant feeling turned into a painful feeling. Painful feeling is painful when it persists and pleasant when it changes. You get bit by a bug, that's painful. You use an ointment and it soothes that feeling, and now it's pleasant. Neither painful nor pleasant feeling is pleasant when there is knowledge of it, and painful when there is no knowledge of it. It's pleasant in the sense that there is awareness tied to it, there is mindfulness there, and painful when there is no knowledge of it. In other words, there is ignorance, there is indifference. So in terms of neither painful nor pleasant feeling, a pleasant feeling here is an equanimous feeling, being balanced, seeing it for what it actually is without identifying. But indifference is pushing it away and not wanting to do anything with it, ignoring the feeling. So when you do have painful feeling and you ignore it, what you're doing is actually adding more attention to it. Instead, when you have a painful feeling while you're sitting down in deep meditation, you recognize that there is aversion related to that painful feeling and you let go of the aversion. And the attention no longer being on that painful feeling starts to go to the object of meditation. And that painful feeling no longer being attended starts to subside because there's no longer attention fueling it. There's no longer any aversion, making it worse than what it actually seems, making it seem worse than what it actually is. Lady, what underlying tendency underlies pleasant feeling? What underlying tendency underlies painful feeling? What underlying tendency underlies neither painful nor pleasant feeling? And Visakha, the underlying tendency to craving underlies pleasant feeling. When there's something that is wonderful in terms of an experience, the mind can have a tendency to want more of it, to crave for it. The underlying tendency to aversion underlies painful feeling. When there is something that hurts, there is an inclination of the mind to want to push it away. The underlying tendency to ignorance underlies neither painful nor pleasant feeling. When you choose to ignore a feeling, you are indifferent to it. But if you see it in an equanimous, mindful manner, as seeing it as being impermanent and therefore impersonal, then you don't have ignorance there. Ignorance is lack of mindfulness, not paying attention to what is happening in relation to your mind in reference to the feeling. But mindfulness is paying attention with attention rooted in reality to what is arising and passing away. Lady, does the underlying tendency to craving underlie all pleasant feeling? Does the underlying tendency to aversion underlie all painful feeling? Does the underlying tendency to ignorance underlie all neither painful nor pleasant feeling? And Visakha, the underlying tendency to craving does not underlie all pleasant feeling. The underlying tendency to aversion does not underlie all painful feeling. The underlying tendency to ignore ignorance does not underlie all neutral feeling. Why? Because there can be a pleasant feeling, a pleasant experience that arises, but if mind is seeing that as being impermanent and impersonal, then there's no tendency to crave for it. If there's a painful feeling and mind sees that feeling as being impermanent dukkha and therefore not to be considered as self, then there is no inclination towards pushing it away. If mind sees the neutral feeling as just being feeling, as being impermanent and therefore dukkha and impersonal, then there's no inclination to see it as being permanent, to seeing it as being satisfactory, to see it as being self. And therefore, not always will the mind incline to it, so long as there's correct mindfulness attached to the feeling. Or in other words, there is right perspective of seeing how that feeling is. When that is the case, then there won't be any underlying tendency to craving, underlying tendency to aversion, underlying tendency to ignorance, or even underlying tendency to conceit or bhava, to personalize or take something personal towards that feeling. Lady, what should be abandoned in regard to pleasant feeling? What should be abandoned in regard to painful feeling? What should be abandoned in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency should be abandoned in regard to pleasant feeling. In other words, a feeling, an experience is wonderful. It's pleasant to the senses, but in of itself, it is not craving. In of itself, it has nothing to do to be let go of. Instead, what has to be let go of, the inclination to crave for it. Likewise, the underlying tendency to aversion should be abandoned in regard to painful feeling. So when you have meditation pain, it's not the pain that you have to siksar. It's the aversion, the mind's inclination to push it away that you siksar, and then come back to your object of meditation. The underlying tendency to ignorance should be abandoned in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling. So what has to be abandoned here is taking that feeling as being me, mine, or myself. And when you do that, when you let go of that, the inclination to take it personal, you are also abandoning the underlying tendency to ignorance. Lady, does the underlying tendency to craving have to be abandoned in regards to all pleasant feeling? Does the underlying tendency to aversion have to be abandoned in regard to all painful feeling? Does the underlying tendency to ignorance have to be abandoned in regard to all neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to craving does not have to be abandoned in regard to all pleasant feeling. Why is that? Because not all pleasant feeling is going to bring up craving. So if there is craving, then you abandon it. The underlying tendency to aversion does not have to be abandoned in regard to all painful feeling. You may experience pain, but you don't have aversion to it. Only when there is aversion, you abandon it. The underlying tendency to ignorance does not have to be abandoned in regard to all neither painful nor pleasant feeling. If you are mindful and you see that feeling as being empty of self and impersonal, then you don't have to abandon ignorance because you already are mindful and you have wisdom rooted in attention, rooted in reality. Here, friend Visakha, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. With that, he abandons lust, and the underlying tendency to lust does not underlie that. In other words, when you get into a state of jhana, not only do the underlying tendencies go away, but also the underlying tendencies towards craving go away, but the underlying tendency towards aversion and ignorance also goes away because it doesn't underlie that experience. Of course, you can choose to get attached to it, and that can create some kind of craving. But then once you're there, you're no longer in the jhana. When there's craving present, there is no longer jhana. When there is inclination to have aversion, there is no longer jhana. When any of those hindrances are present or any of the underlying feelings are present, then there is no longer any jhana. Here, a bhikkhu considers, when shall I enter and abide in that base that the noble ones now enter upon and abide in one who thus generates a longing for the supreme liberations, that is to say, for the jhanas. Grief arises with that longing as condition. With that, he abandons aversion, and the underlying tendency to aversion does not underlie that. In other words, there is the right kind of longing. There is the application of mind, applying mind in a direction for the purpose of entering jhana. When that happens, no aversion arises. Here, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the disappearance of joy and grief, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. With that, he abandons ignorance, and the underlying tendency to ignorance does not underlie that. So another way to understand this is when you have this mental pleasant feeling in the form of the first and second jhana, then you don't have craving for sensual pleasures. When you experience the tranquility in the third jhana, you no longer have aversion towards any kind of experience, because now you're no longer longing for that experience. When you have the equanimity in the fourth jhana, you no longer have the underlying tendency towards ignorance, because you are ever mindful. You have the purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. Lady, what is the counterpart of pleasant feeling? This word counterpart comes from the word patibhaga. So patibhaga can mean step by step, one leads to the other, or it can also mean the opposite of something. So in this case, in this context, he's saying, what is the opposite of pleasant feeling? Then Visakha, painful feeling is the counterpart of pleasant feeling. What is the counterpart of painful feeling? Pleasant feeling is the counterpart of painful feeling. What is the counterpart of neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Ignorance is the counterpart of neither painful nor pleasant feeling. What is the counterpart of ignorance? True knowledge is the counterpart of ignorance. So you go from ignorance to true knowledge. What is the counterpart? Meaning, what is the step above true knowledge? Deliverance is the counterpart of true knowledge. Deliverance from craving, deliverance from suffering. And what does that lead to? What is the counterpart of deliverance? Nibbana is the counterpart of deliverance, the experience of the unconditioned. Once you have deconditioned everything, the experience of Nibbana happens. Lady, what is the counterpart of Nibbana? Friend Visakha, you have pushed this line of questioning too far. Now he wants to know, is there anything beyond the unconditioned? And so she says, you are not able to grasp the limit of questions, for the holy life, the practice, friend Visakha, is grounded upon Nibbana, culminates in Nibbana, ends in Nibbana, in the unconditioned. If you wish, friend Visakha, go to the Blessed One and ask him about the meaning of this. As the Blessed One explains it to you, so you should remember it. Then the lay follower Visakha, having delighted and rejoiced in the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina's words, rose from his seat, and after paying homage to her, keeping her on his right, he went to the Blessed One. After paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and told the Blessed One his entire conversation with the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina. When he finished speaking, the Blessed One told him, the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina is wise, Visakha. The Bhikkhuni Dhammadina has great wisdom. In other words, she has the understanding of dependent origination. She knows what she's talking about through knowledge and experience. If you had asked me the meaning of this, I would have explained it to you in the same way that the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina has explained it. Such is its meaning, and so you should remember it. That is what the Blessed One said. The lay follower Visakha was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
What is the difference between wisdom and insight?
Wisdom, in a specific context, is being able to see and understand and experience dependent origination. When you see dependent origination for yourself, you understand this whole process as being impersonal. Insight is a form of thought that arises dependent upon cultivation of practice. So an insight into your own practice is different from wisdom itself. Wisdom is the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, the understanding of karma, the understanding of rebirth, the establishing of right view. Insight, in that sense, is more of when you use your intuition, for example, to find out why is it my practice is not going a certain way, and there's a thought that arises out of nowhere. That is insight. That is a thought that directs you into the correct answer for what you're seeking.
I got a question.
Yes.
When you were talking about was it mental, verbal, and bodily formations? It was the mental was it feeling, perception, and feeling, right?
Yes.
So I just want to make sure I understand it, because like the verbal one, I didn't realize was like mentally verbalizing as well. I always think it's like vocally, but for perception, that's is that sort of the labeling process that the mind goes through, like this is that, that's that, and tries to put a narrative together?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
That's perception. So perception is always rooted in memory. That's why perception is also known as recognition. So you're cognizing what you've already experienced before. Let's say you have never seen or experienced the flame of a stove, and you put your hand on the stove, you experience the heat, you experience the fire, and you experience pain. That is the feeling. The perception that that is hot and painful is the perception. The seeing of that as being pain and hot and painful is perception. And so now you are always remembering that that stove, when it's on fire, is hot and painful. So don't put your hand on the stove. So that is rooted in memory. So when you, as a child, when we were in kindergarten and first grade, we learned what was the color red, what was the color blue, what was the color yellow. This is a dog, this is a cat, and so on. What we were learning is putting names to things, and now we were remembering them. So we were cognizing that this is the color red. We were cognizing this is the color yellow. And now whenever we see red, our mind automatically recognizes and labels that thing as being red, or as that thing as being blue. So perception is always rooted in memory.
So it's like, when you're kids and you're learning stuff, you're putting a whole reality together for them that, when you meditate, you start to deconstruct that.
Yes.
And say, well, this is not how it actually is, but I kind of understand how we sort of put it together to make sense of things. Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good way of looking at it, because the reality that we experience is conditioned. And what that means is it's conditioned by our perceptions. It's conditioned by our notions and ideas. And when you meditate and you go through this process of deconstructing, as we talk about unconditioning the mind, we're letting go of any preconceived notions of what reality is or isn't. Because when you see a person, let's say you go and meet somebody that you haven't met in a long time, you have a picture, you have an image of that person being a certain way. And after 5 years of meeting them, you have an expectation, even if you don't really verbalize it or consciously expect it, there's an unconscious expectation that that person is still the same. And then there's cognitive dissonance because you realize that that person has changed, or they're no longer the same person that they were 5 years ago. So we create the reality around us dependent upon our perceptions, dependent upon our ideas and projections. But to see reality as it actually is, that is Yatta Bhuta Jnana Dasanam. the knowledge and vision of things as they really are, happens because of the experience of the unconditioning, because of the experience of Nibbana. That's why the Arhat's mind no longer takes anything personal, no longer projects anything as being me, mine, or myself, and no longer has preconceived notions about something. Yes, they have perceptions. Yes, they perceive red as red, but there's no longer conceptualizing that red as being mine, me, or myself, and they no longer project any kinds of opinions about a person, or about values, or about people, or about trees, or anything. They see things as they really are, in a state of being unconditioned. Their mind is unconditioned.
It sort of reminds, somebody told me that there was some study that was done based on people listening to a bell, I guess ordinary people and monks, and I guess they were doing, I don't know if it was brain scans. It was just, he just told me the gist of it. And every time someone listened to a gong, it peaked, and then the next time it peaked a little, and then less and less. But for the meditators, it was up every single time the same. Is that kind of like they didn't, it was like an experience for the first time. They still understand what it
Yes.
is, but the mind's not saying, oh yeah, I know what that is, and
Yeah,
gets
I
used
expect
to it.
that to be there. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't get
Right.
used to it. It's fresh in every moment. Yes. Any other questions? No one else? Okay. Let's share some merit.
May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sādhu, sādhu, sādhu.